The weight of home. The diner door slammed open at dawn, but 17-year-old Elena Harper barely looked up from the burnt hash brown smoking on the griddle. Her hand shook, not from fear, but from 48 hours without sleep. Behind her, in the cramped back room that smelled of camphor and desperation, her mother's labored breathing rattled like stones in a tin can. The rent notice on the counter glowed accusatory red. Final warning. 3 customers all week, bills stacked higher than flour sacks. And somewhere in the pre-dawn darkness of Redfield, Wyoming territory, 1884, a choice was coming that would change everything. If you're ready to follow Elena's journey from the edge of ruin to something she never dared hope for, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning sun hadn't yet cleared the eastern ridge when Elena scraped the ruined breakfast into the slop bucket. Her father would have been ashamed. Thomas Harper had never burned so much as a biscuit in 20 years of running Harper's roadside diner. But Thomas Harper had been dead 18 months and his daughter was drowning. She wiped her hands on an apron gone gray from too many washings and moved to the counter where yesterday's coffee sat cold in the pot. The bitter smell mixed with the ever-present dust that blew in through cracks in the weathered walls. Outside, Redfield's main street lay empty except for a tumbleweed caught against the hardware store's porch. "Elena?" The voice from the back room was thread-thin, barely audible over the crackling of the ancient cook stove. "I'm here, Mama." Elena filled a tin cup with water from the pump, her movements automatic, efficient. She'd learned to conserve every step, every motion. Energy was a currency she could no longer afford to waste. Margaret Harper lay in the narrow bed pushed against the wall, her face the color of old parchment. The consumption had been eating at her for 6 months now, turning a woman who'd once kneaded bread dough with strong hands into something fragile as dried flowers. "You should be sleeping," Margaret whispered, though her eyes held the knowledge that sleep was a luxury neither of them possessed anymore. "Had the breakfast rush." Elena helped her mother sit up, supporting her weight, so little of it now, against the thin pillows. The lie sat bitter on her tongue. There had been no breakfast rush. There hadn't been a rush of any kind since the new railroad spur bypassed Redfield entirely, routing travelers 20 miles south through Cooperton instead. Margaret's fingers, thin as bird bones, wrapped around the cup. She managed 3 small sips before the coughing started, deep, wet sounds that seemed to tear something vital loose with each spasm. Elena held her until it passed, her own heart hammering against her ribs. "The diner," Margaret said when she could speak again. "Your father—" "Don't worry about the diner." Elena eased her mother back down, pulled the threadbare quilt up to her chin. "Just rest." But Margaret's eyes had found the rent notice on the table beside the bed, and Elena watched understanding settle over her mother's face like a shadow. "How much time?" Margaret asked. "Enough," Elena lied. 3 days. They had 3 days before Samuel Grayson, who owned half of Redfield's buildings, including this one, would make good on his promise to evict them. She'd begged him for an extension last week, standing in his bank office, while he looked at her with eyes that calculated her desperation down to the penny. "Can't run a business on sentiment, Miss Harper," he'd said, his voice oiled with false sympathy. "Your father understood that." Her father had understood a lot of things. He'd understood that good food and honest dealing built loyalty. He'd understood that a town needed gathering places, needed the smell of coffee and bacon to remind folks they were part of something larger than their individual struggles. He'd understood everything except how to prepare his 17-year-old daughter for the day when she'd stand alone against an indifferent world with nothing but a failing business and a dying mother to show for his legacy. Elena returned to the front room as the sun finally broke over the ridge, throwing long shadows across the empty tables. She'd set them all out of habit, 6 four-tops with their mismatched chairs, each one with a napkin holder and salt shaker precisely centered. The display case beside the register stood empty except for 2 pieces of yesterday's cornbread that had gone hard as saddle leather. She should open it. 9 o'clock. That had been her father's rule. Harper's roadside diner opens at 9, closes at 7, 6 days a week. Sunday for the soul, every other day for the stomach. But what was the point of opening when nobody came? The bell above the door chimed and Elena's heart jumped before she could stop it. She turned, smoothing her apron, reaching for the smile her father had taught her. "Welcome to—" The words died in her throat. Caleb Turner stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, his tall frame backlit by the morning sun. Elena knew him. Everyone in Redfield knew the quiet rancher who ran the CT spread 15 miles north of town. He came to town maybe once a month for supplies, spoke to no one more than necessary, and had buried his young wife 3 years ago without shedding a tear anyone saw. "Mr. Turner." Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Coffee?" "Please." He moved to a table by the window, his boots leaving prints in the dust on the floor. Elena grabbed the pot and a clean cup, grateful to have something to do with her hands. Up close she could see the lines that weather and grief had carved around his eyes. He couldn't be more than 35, but he carried himself with the careful stillness of someone much older. His hands, wrapped around the cup she filled, were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who knew hard work intimately. "Heard you might be closing," he said without preamble. Elena's spine stiffened. "Where'd you hear that?" "Town talks." He took a sip of the coffee, and she waited for him to grimace at how bitter it had become from sitting too long on the heat. He didn't. "Grayson's been mentioning it." Of course he had. Samuel Grayson probably had 3 buyers lined up already, ready to turn her father's diner into whatever would squeeze the most profit from this dying town. "Haven't decided yet," Elena said, though they both knew it was a lie. Caleb nodded slowly, his gaze moving to the back room where Margaret's coughing had started again. Elena fought the urge to run to her mother, to hide the evidence of their deterioration from this stranger's eyes. "How's your mother?" The question, asked in that low, careful voice, nearly undid her. Elena gripped the coffee pot handle until her knuckles went white. "She's fine." Another lie. She was accumulating them like debts. Caleb set his cup down, and the small sound seemed loud in the empty diner. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Harper." Elena waited, her body tense as wire. "I need a cook at the ranch. Had one, but he took off last month, found gold fever more appealing than regular wages." A ghost of something that might have been humor touched his mouth. "Ranch hands been living on beans and jerky for weeks now. They're starting to complain. I don't— Room and board included," he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Separate cabin for you and your mother, doctor visits covered, $40 a month." The number hit Elena like cold water. $40. She currently made maybe 15 on a good month, and there hadn't been a good month since spring. "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "You don't know me. You don't know if I can cook." "Your father's biscuits were the best in 3 territories," Caleb said simply. "Figure the daughter learned something." Elena's throat tightened. She turned away, made a show of wiping down the already clean counter. Behind her, she heard the scrape of Caleb's chair as he stood. "Think about it," he said. "Offer stands through the end of the week." His boots crossed the floor, and she heard the door open. She should let him leave. Should hold on to her pride, her father's dream, the last shreds of independence she possessed. "Mr. Turner," he paused in the doorway. "If I came—" Elena forced herself to meet his eyes. "It would just be temporary, until my mother's better, until I can figure out how to save the diner." Something shifted in his expression, something that might have been understanding or pity, or both. "Of course," he said quietly. "Just temporary." The door closed behind him, the bell's chime echoing in the empty space. Elena stood alone in her father's diner, surrounded by empty tables and impossible choices, and let herself acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. Temporary was all she had left. The afternoon brought exactly 2 customers, old Mrs. Chen, who ordered hot water and brought her own tea leaves, and a drifter who counted out coins for a bowl of yesterday's stew before moving on. Elena served them both with mechanical precision, her mind circling Caleb Turner's offer like a hawk over a rabbit. $40 a month, medical care, a place for her mother to rest that didn't smell like grease and failure, but it meant closing the diner, admitting defeat, abandoning the dream her father had poured his life into. She was scrubbing the same pot for the 3rd time when the back door banged open and Doc Winters came through, his medical bag in hand and exhaustion written across his weathered face. "How is she?" Elena asked, though she could read the answer in the set of his shoulders. "Worse." He set his bag on the counter with a heavy thud. "The consumption's spreading faster than I'd hoped. She needs rest, Elena. Real rest. Not a bed 5 feet from a kitchen where you're working yourself to death. I can't afford. I know what you can afford." Doc Winters had been coming twice a week for the past month, never once mentioning payment. "I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about time. Your mother doesn't have much of it left unless we can slow this thing down." The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples of panic that Elena shoved down ruthlessly. She couldn't afford panic, couldn't afford to break. "There might be something," she heard herself say. "A job. At the CT Ranch." Doc Winters' eyebrows rose. "Caleb Turner's place?" She nodded. "That'd do it," he said slowly. "Clean air up there in the high country. Good water. And Caleb's got the money for laudanum, tonics, whatever she needs." He paused, studying her face. "But you'd have to close the diner." "I know. Your father—" "My father's dead." The words came out harsher than she intended, carrying 18 months of grief and exhaustion. "And my mother's dying. The diner can't save either of them." Doc Winters was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and squeezed her shoulder, the gesture so unexpected that Elena felt tears burn behind her eyes. "Your father would understand," he said gently. "Thomas Harper loved this place, but he loved you and Margaret more." After he left, Elena stood in the kitchen where her father had taught her to crack eggs one-handed and flip pancakes without breaking them, where he'd shown her how to judge the heat of the oven by counting seconds with her hand inside, where they'd worked side by side through 1,000 breakfast rushes, moving around each other with the practiced ease of dancers. The memories were thick as smoke and just as suffocating. She found Margaret awake, staring at the ceiling with eyes that seemed to see something far beyond the water-stained boards. "Mama," Elena said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I need to tell you something." Margaret's hand found hers, the grip surprisingly strong. "I've been offered a job at the CT Ranch. It would mean closing the diner, but take it." Margaret's voice was firm despite its weakness. "But Daddy's dream, your father's dream, was for you to have a good life." Margaret turned her head to look at Elena directly. "Not to kill yourself maintaining a building while the world moves on without you. He'd want you to choose survival, baby. He'd want you to choose yourself." The tears Elena had been holding back finally spilled over. She tried to wipe them away, but they kept coming. 18 months of grief and fear and exhaustion pouring out in silent sobs that shook her whole body. Margaret pulled her down, and Elena curled against her mother's chest the way she had as a child, listening to the rattling breath that might not last the month, might not last the week. "I'm so tired, Mama," she whispered. "I know, baby, I know." They stayed like that until the sun began to set, painting the walls in shades of amber and rust. When Elena finally rose, her decision was made. She spent the evening writing a letter to Caleb Turner in her careful schoolgirl script. "Mr. Turner, I accept your offer. My mother and I will be ready to travel to the ranch by week's end, pending arrangements with Mr. Grayson regarding the diner property. Respectfully, Elena Harper." She sealed it with wax from a candle stub and walked it to the post office before she could change her mind. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and distance. Redfield's few lit windows glowed like dying embers against the darkness. Samuel Grayson was in his office above the bank, lamplight visible through the curtains. Elena climbed the outside stairs and knocked before courage could fail her. "Come in." He sat behind a massive desk that dwarfed the small room, papers spread before him like a general's battle plans. When he saw her, something predatory flickered in his eyes. "Miss Harper, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Elena stood straight, shoulders back, channeling every ounce of her father's dignity. "I'm closing the diner. I'll be out by Friday." Grayson leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "I see. And the rent you owe?" "I'll pay what I can now. The rest—" She swallowed hard. "I'm leaving the equipment, the furniture, everything. That should more than cover it." "Should it?" He let the words hang there, watching her squirm. Then he smiled. Very well. I accept your terms. I'll have the papers drawn up by Thursday. Elena nodded and turned to leave. Miss Harper? She paused at the door. Your father was a proud man. Wonder what he'd think of his daughter running off to cook for Caleb Turner. The barb found its mark, but Elena didn't let it show. She met Grayson's eyes steadily. My father was a practical man, Mr. Grayson. He'd think I was doing what needed to be done to keep my mother alive. She left before he could respond, her hands shaking only after she'd descended the stairs and turned the corner into darkness. The next 3 days passed in a blur of sorting, packing, and saying goodbye to a life that had already died piece by piece. Elena kept the diner closed, ignoring the curious looks from passers-by and the one knock from Mrs. Chen, who wanted her morning hot water. She sold what little she could, the good knives to the hardware store, her father's pocket watch to a traveling merchant, her mother's wedding quilt to a rancher's wife who'd always admired it. Each transaction felt like cutting away a piece of herself, but the coins added up. Enough for medicine, enough for emergencies. Caleb Turner appeared on Thursday morning with a wagon and a quiet ranch hand named Miguel, who helped load their few possessions with efficient care. Elena watched from the diner doorway as they secured trunks and crates, her mother already settled on the wagon seat with blankets piled around her thin frame. Ready? Caleb asked, and Elena realized he was offering her a way out, one last chance to refuse. She looked back at the diner one final time, the empty tables, the silent kitchen, the dreams that had died there along with her father. Yes, she said. I'm ready. The ride north took 4 hours over rough country, climbing steadily into the high valleys where the air grew thin and clean. Margaret dozed against Elena's shoulder while Caleb drove in comfortable silence, only speaking to point out landmarks or warn of rough patches in the road. The CT Ranch appeared as they crested a final rise, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a valley where Cottonwood Creek ran silver through tall grass. The main house was solid timber, 2 stories with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Beyond it stood barns, corrals, a bunkhouse, and a small cabin set apart from the other buildings. That's yours, Caleb said, nodding toward the cabin. Had the boys clean it out, stock it with firewood and basics. Kitchen's small but functional. Elena stared at the little structure with its fresh chinked walls and stone chimney. It was more than she'd dared hope for. They settled Margaret into bed first, a real bed with a corn husk mattress and clean linens that smelled of sunshine. The cabin had 2 rooms, a main living space with a kitchen area and a separate bedroom barely big enough for the bed and a dresser. But the windows let in good light, and the floor was solid, and there was a small porch facing east toward the mountains. I'll send Miguel's wife, Rosa, over later, Caleb said from the doorway. She can help you get settled, show you where things are. Elena turned from unpacking to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Mr. Turner, Caleb, he said, if we're going to work together, might as well use names. Caleb? The name felt strange on her tongue. Thank you, for this, for all of it. He nodded once, sharp and brief. Supper's at 6. I'll have Rosa show you the kitchen tomorrow, let you get your bearings. For tonight, just rest. But rest was impossible. Elena unpacked their few belongings, arranged and rearranged the simple furniture, checked on her mother a dozen times. When Rosa arrived, a round-faced woman with kind eyes and work-roughened hands, Elena bombarded her with questions about the ranch, the hands, the kitchen setup. Slow down, mija, Rosa laughed. You'll have time to learn it all. For now, come. I'll show you the main house, introduce you to the chaos you've inherited. The main house kitchen was 3 times the size of the diners, with a massive iron stove, multiple work surfaces, and storage that actually held food instead of empty promises. 6 ranch hands sat around a scarred wooden table, eating what looked like Rosa's attempt at feeding them. They looked up when Elena entered, their faces registering surprise, curiosity, and in one case, clear appreciation that made her spine stiffen. Boys, this is Elena Harper, Rosa announced. She's your new cook, so you better treat her with respect, or I'll tell your mothers what you've been up to. Ain't got a mother, one of them said, a lanky kid who couldn't be more than 19. Then I'll make one up just to disappoint her with stories about you, Tommy. Rosa swatted him with a dish towel. Elena, this is Tommy, Jack, Pete, Sam, Louise, and the ugly one in the corner is Dusty. Ugly? Dusty protested. I'm the best-looking man in this territory. That's what worries me, Rosa muttered. Elena found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. The easy banter reminded her of the diner at its best, when regular customers traded jokes across tables and her father presided over it all with quiet humor. Miss Harper will start tomorrow, Caleb's voice came from the doorway, and the room's energy shifted subtly. The hands straightened, jokes dying on their lips. I expect you to make her feel welcome and stay out of her way while she works. Yes, boss, they chorused. Elena met Caleb's eyes across the room and saw something there that might have been approval, or warning, or both. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed in an unfamiliar room, listening to her mother's breathing from the next room, already easier, already stronger, Elena let herself feel the full weight of what she'd done. She'd given up her father's dream, abandoned the town where she'd been born, placed herself and her mother in the hands of a man she barely knew, on a ranch miles from anywhere, cooking for rough men in a kitchen that wasn't hers. But Margaret was breathing easier, and for the first time in 18 months, Elena wasn't alone. She fell asleep to the sound of wind through pines and the distant lowing of cattle, and dreamed of her father standing in the diner doorway, smiling, waving goodbye. The rooster's crow pulled Elena from sleep before dawn had fully broken. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling was wrong. The sounds were wrong. Even the quality of darkness felt different. Then memory returned with the weight of everything she'd left behind, and she rose quickly, pulling on her work dress in the pre-dawn chill. Margaret still slept, her breathing steady and deep in a way it hadn't been for months. Elena paused in the doorway, watching the rise and fall of her mother's chest, and felt something loosen in her own. One night of clean air and real rest had already made a difference. The main house kitchen was dark when she arrived, but someone had already stoked the stove. The coals glowed red in the dimness, and Elena found herself standing in the unfamiliar space trying to remember where Rosa had said things were kept. The pantry was to the left, the cold storage out back, the flour and cornmeal in the big bins by the window. She'd fed crowds before. The diner had seen its share of busy mornings, when the stagecoach still stopped and travelers needed hot food before moving on. But this was different. This kitchen belonged to someone else, operated by someone else's rules, and she was just a hired hand trying not to fail on her first day. Coffee's in the blue tin. Elena spun to find Caleb standing in the doorway, suspenders hanging loose over his work shirt, his hair still mussed from sleep. In the gray dawn light, he looked younger, less guarded. I didn't mean to wake you, she said. Didn't. I'm usually up before the rooster remembers his job. He moved past her to the stove, his movements economical and familiar. Boys expect breakfast at 5:30. They'll eat anything that's hot and won't kill them, so don't worry about impressing anyone. Elena watched him measure coffee into the big pot, add water from the pump, set it on the hottest part of the stove. His hands were steady, confident, hands that knew their way around a kitchen despite running a cattle ranch. Your wife, Elena said before she could stop herself. Did she cook for the hands? Caleb's hands stilled for just a moment. Sarah preferred the garden. We had a cook then, old Charlie, who'd been with my father. Sarah would make preserves, put up vegetables, bake when the mood struck her. His voice was carefully neutral, offering facts without emotion. Charlie taught me the basics after she died. Figured a man should know how to feed himself. I'm sorry, Elena said quietly, for your loss. He nodded once, accepting the condolence without meeting her eyes. 3 years now. Gets easier, they say. Mostly, they're lying. The honesty of it startled her. Most people offered platitudes about time healing all wounds or loved ones watching from above. Caleb just stated the truth plainly. Grief was grief, and it didn't follow anyone's schedule for improvement. 18 months, Elena offered in return. Since my father. It doesn't get easier, just different. Their eyes met across the warming kitchen, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Understanding that some losses carved out spaces nothing else could fill. Well then, Caleb said finally, Suppose we're both well practiced at doing what needs doing regardless. He showed her where things were kept, his explanations brief but thorough. The hands liked their eggs scrambled, not fried. Biscuits every morning without fail. Bacon when they had it, salt pork when they didn't. Coffee strong enough to strip paint, and plenty of it. "They're good men," he said as footsteps started sounding from the bunkhouse. "Work hard, don't complain much. But they're used to rough living. You cook like you did for your diner customers. They'll think they've died and gone to heaven." Elena set to work, her hands finding their rhythm despite the unfamiliar kitchen. The stove drew different from the one she'd grown up with, running hotter on the left side. The work surface was higher, forcing her to adjust her stance. But flour was flour, lard was lard, and biscuits were biscuits, no matter whose oven they baked in. The hands came in smelling of horses and leather and the pre-dawn cold, bringing noise and energy that filled the kitchen like a flood. They settled around the big table, talking over each other about the day's work, arguing good-naturedly about who'd shirked what chore yesterday. Elena served them the way her father had taught her, efficiently, quietly, reading the table to know who needed more coffee or another biscuit before they had to ask. She caught fragments of their conversation as she moved between stove and table. "North pasture fence is down in 3 places," Luis was saying. "Looks like elk went through." "We need to move the herd to higher ground before the weather turns," Jack added, getting late in the season. Tommy, the youngest, was staring at Elena with undisguised admiration until Dusty kicked him under the table hard enough to make him yelp. "Boss said eyes on your plate, kid," Dusty muttered. Elena hid her smile and returned to the stove. She'd dealt with admirers before, young men who confused good cooking with romantic interest. Her father had taught her how to deflect attention without causing offense, how to be friendly without being available. Caleb ate in silence, listening to his men's conversation but not contributing much. Elena noticed how they deferred to him without him having to demand it, how his occasional nods or brief comments carried more weight than longer speeches might have. "Miss Harper," Pete said, catching her attention as she refilled his coffee. He was older than the others, maybe 40, with silver threading his dark hair. "These biscuits are mighty fine. Best we've had since Charlie left." A murmur of agreement went around the table. "Thank you," Elena said. "I'm still learning the stove's temperament." "Give it a week," Rosa said, appearing in the doorway with a basket of eggs. "You'll have that cantankerous beast purring like a kitten." She set the basket on the counter and surveyed the table with satisfaction. "See, boys? This is what real cooking looks like. Try to remember it next time you complain about my efforts." "Your cooking's fine, Rosa," Sam protested. "My cooking keeps you alive," Rosa corrected. "Elena's cooking will make you remember why living's worthwhile." The easy laughter that followed felt like acceptance, and Elena found some of the tightness in her shoulders easing. These men weren't diner customers passing through on their way to somewhere else. They were her daily bread now, literally and figuratively. Their satisfaction meant job security, and job security meant medicine for Margaret and a roof over their heads. After breakfast, while the hands dispersed to their various tasks, Elena and Rosa tackled the cleanup. Rosa worked with the easy efficiency of long practice, talking steadily as she scrubbed. "Caleb's a good man," she said without preamble. "Quiet, keeps his feelings close but fair, pays on time, doesn't ask more than he's willing to give himself. When Miguel broke his leg 2 years back, Caleb kept him on full wages the whole time he was healing." "How long have you been here?" Elena asked. 8 years. Came with Miguel when Caleb's father was still running things. Old Mr. Turner was harder, meaner. Caleb's got his father's work ethic, but his mother's heart." Rosa paused, her hand stilling in the wash water. "Sarah's death nearly broke him. He loved that girl something fierce, but he didn't let it make him bitter, just quieter." Elena absorbed this, filing it away with the other small pieces of Caleb Turner she was collecting. A man who knew grief, who kept his word, who ran his ranch with quiet competence and treated his people fairly. "He doesn't talk much about her," Elena ventured. "No, he doesn't talk much about anything." Rosa handed her a clean plate to dry. "But he notices things. He noticed you were struggling in town, noticed your mama was sick, noticed you needed help. Caleb's got a way of seeing what needs doing and doing it without making a fuss about it. The words sat heavy with meaning Elena wasn't quite ready to examine. She'd accepted this job out of desperation, not charity. The fact that Caleb had offered it when he noticed her struggling didn't change the fundamental transaction, her labor for his money. Did it? The morning slipped into afternoon as Elena explored the rhythms of ranch life. Lunch was a simpler affair: cold meat, fresh bread, pickles from Rose's stores. The hands ate quickly and returned to work, their conversation focused on fence lines and cattle counts and the approaching weather. Elena checked on Margaret between meals, finding her mother sitting up in bed with color in her cheeks that hadn't been there in months. "This air," Margaret said wonderingly. "I can breathe, Elena, really breathe." "Don't overdo it," Elena cautioned, but she couldn't stop smiling. "Doc Winters said rest was crucial. I've done nothing but rest for 6 months. What I need is to feel useful again." Margaret's eyes traveled around the small cabin. "Maybe I could do some mending, or—" "Mama, no. You need to focus on getting well." "Getting well means having a reason to get well," Margaret countered. "Lying in bed watching the ceiling won't heal me half so fast as having purpose." It was an old argument, one that had no good answer. Elena compromised by bringing her mother some simple mending, torn dish towels, a shirt missing buttons, and returned to the main house to start preparing supper. The kitchen was becoming familiar now, the stove's quirks less mysterious. She found a haunch of venison in the cold storage, potatoes and carrots from the root cellar, dried herbs hanging by the window. Her hands moved through the familiar motions of peeling and chopping while her mind wandered. What would her father think of this place? Of her cooking for rough ranch hands instead of travelers and townspeople? Would he see it as a betrayal or necessary survival? She was lost in these thoughts when Caleb came in through the back door, bringing the smell of horses and autumn with him. He crossed to the pump and washed his hands, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. "How's your mother settling in?" he asked. "Better already. The clean air suits her." "Good." He dried his hands on a towel, then lingered, seeming to search for words. "I meant what I said about the doctor. Whatever she needs, you let me know." "I will. Thank you." He nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "The hands are impressed. They've been bragging to the neighboring ranch about their new cook. Expect we'll have visitors come Sunday. Cowboys from the Double R looking for excuses to sample your biscuits." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm just doing my job." "You're doing it well." The simple words carried weight. "Your father taught you good." After he left, Elena stood staring at the doorway, Caleb's quiet praise warming something in her chest she'd thought had gone cold. She'd spent so long seeing herself as a failure, failing to save the diner, failing to heal her mother, failing to be the daughter Thomas Harper deserved, that competence felt foreign. Novel. Maybe she could do this. Maybe she could build something here that wasn't just survival, but actual achievement. Supper was venison stew with dumplings, the kind of hearty meal that stuck to ribs and satisfied souls weary from hard labor. The hands ate with single-minded dedication, their appreciation expressed in cleaned plates and requests for seconds. Elena watched them from her station by the stove, and for the first time since her father's death, felt something like pride in her work. "Miss Elena," Tommy said, scraping his bowl for the last drops of gravy. "I don't mean to be forward, but that's the best meal I've had since my mama died 4 years back." The table went quiet at that, the other hands looking at Tommy with something between sympathy and embarrassment at such open emotion. But Tommy just met Elena's eyes steadily, his young face serious. "Thank you for saying so," Elena said gently. "That means more than you know." The moment passed, conversation resuming as the men argued about tomorrow's work rotation. But Elena saw the looks they gave her now, not just appreciation for good food, but something closer to respect, maybe even gratitude. She was scrubbing the last pot when Caleb returned, changed out of his work clothes into clean denim and a pressed shirt. He looked almost formal, and Elena felt suddenly aware of her own disheveled state, hair escaping its pins, apron-stained, exhaustion written in every line of her body. "Thought you might want some help," he said, picking up a dish towel. "You don't have to." "I know." He started drying the clean dishes she'd stacked by the pump, his movements practiced. "But it's my kitchen too, and I can't in good conscience leave all the work to you on your first day." They worked in companionable silence for several minutes, the rhythm easy and natural. Elena found herself stealing glances at him, the way his sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms roped with muscle and marked with old scars, the way he handled the dishes carefully despite his large hands, the furrow of concentration between his brows. "Can I ask you something?" she said before she could think better of it. "You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer." "Why did you really offer me this job?" His hand stilled for a moment, then resumed drying. "Told you, needed a cook. There are other cooks, other women who could have used the work and didn't come with a sick mother and a failing business attached." Caleb set down the plate he'd been drying and turned to face her fully. In the lamplight, his eyes were darker, unreadable. "You want the truth?" "Please." "I watched you run that diner for 18 months after your father died. Watched you work yourself near to death trying to keep it alive while taking care of your mother. Watched you turn into a ghost of yourself and never once ask for help." He paused, his jaw working. "Reminded me of myself after Sarah died. Thought maybe I could keep you from making all the same mistakes I did." The honesty of it stole her breath. Elena gripped the edge of the wash basin, suddenly unsteady. "I don't need saving," she managed. "Didn't say you did. Said I needed a cook and you needed a job. Everything else is just two people helping each other survive." His voice gentled. "Nothing wrong with accepting help, Miss Harper. Doesn't make you weak. Just makes you human." He left her with those words, disappearing into the darkness beyond the kitchen door. Elena finished the dishes alone, her hands moving automatically while her mind turned over what he'd said. Two people helping each other survive. Was that all this was? Or was there something else growing in the spaces between employer and employee, between stranger and stranger? She didn't let herself answer that question. Not yet. The days developed their own rhythm after that. Elena rose before dawn, cooked breakfast for the hands, checked on Margaret, prepared lunch, cooked supper, cleaned up after. The work was hard but satisfying in ways the diner had stopped being. Here, every meal was appreciated, every effort noticed. Margaret grew stronger day by day, the terrible rattle in her chest easing until some mornings Elena almost forgot her mother was sick at all. Doc Winters came on Saturday, riding up from Redfield with his bag and his careful examination. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," he told Elena privately. "I won't lie and say she's cured, but she's stabilized in ways I didn't think possible. This air, the rest, the lack of stress, it's all working in her favor." "How long?" Elena asked, needing to know even though the question terrified her. "Could be months, could be years." He squeezed her shoulder. "Could be she beats this thing entirely if we're lucky. But Elena, don't plan your whole life around worst cases. Let yourself hope a little." Hope felt dangerous, like a luxury she couldn't afford. But walking back to the cabin, seeing Margaret sitting on the porch with Rosa and laughing at something the older woman had said, Elena felt it anyway. Small and fragile as a new flame, but there. Sunday brought the promised visitors from the Double R Ranch, 4 cowboys who'd ridden over ostensibly to discuss cattle prices with Caleb, but really to see if the rumors about the new cook were true. Elena fed them lunch, endured their compliments and Tommy's jealous glares, and sent them on their way with full bellies and reluctant departures. "You've started something," Caleb told her that evening as they cleaned up together. It had become their habit, this quiet time after supper when the hands had dispersed and the kitchen was theirs alone. Every ranch within 20 miles will be inventing excuses to stop by now. "Is that a problem?" "Depends. You planning to run off with some sweet-talking cowboy who promises you the moon?" She looked up sharply, but his face was carefully neutral, his tone light. Still, something flickered in his eyes that might have been actual concern. "I'm not planning to run anywhere," Elena said firmly. "I'm here to do a job and take care of my mother. That's all." "Good." The single word carried more weight than it should have. Caleb hung up his dish towel with precise care. "Because you belong here now. The ranch already feels different with you in it." He left before she could ask what he meant by that, and Elena stood alone in the kitchen trying to decipher the conversation's undercurrents. Caleb Turner was a puzzle she wasn't sure she had the right to solve. A good man carrying old grief, offering help without demanding anything in return, revealing himself in small moments before retreating behind walls of careful distance. The second week brought the first real test of her skills when Caleb announced they'd be branding cattle and would need to feed not just his hands, but a crew from the neighboring ranch who'd come to help. 16 men total, all hungry, all expecting the kind of food that kept up with brutal physical labor. Elena planned the meals with military precision: beef stew with dumplings for lunch, roasted chicken with all the fixings for supper, pies and biscuits enough to feed an army. Rosa helped, amused by Elena's intensity. "They're cowboys, mija, not royalty. They'll eat anything." "But they don't have to," Elena countered, rolling out pie crusts with fierce concentration. "They could go somewhere else, to some ranch with a cook who gives them something to remember. I want them to remember this meal. Want them to know the CT serves the best food in 3 territories." Rosa studied her thoughtfully. "This about pride or about proving something? Can it be both?" The branding day dawned clear and cold, perfect working weather. The visiting crew arrived at dawn, and Elena had coffee and breakfast ready: scrambled eggs, bacon, biscuits with gravy, fried potatoes. She watched their faces as they ate, cataloging every reaction, every second helping, every compliment murmured between bites. "Ma'am," one of the visiting hands said, an older man with a scar across his cheek, "I've worked ranches from here to Texas, and I ain't never had breakfast this good. You got a gift." The words settled warm in her chest. A gift. Not just competence or training, but an actual talent worth acknowledging. Caleb caught her eye from across the table and smiled. A real smile that transformed his usually serious face into something almost boyish. Elena felt an answering warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the compliment and everything to do with that smile. Lunch was organized chaos, 16 hungry men descending on the kitchen like locusts. But Elena had prepared, and the stew held out, and the biscuits kept coming hot from the oven until every man was satisfied. She moved through the crowd with coffee and conversation, learning names, trading jokes, earning her place among them. By supper, she was exhausted but exhilarated. The chicken came out perfect, golden and crispy-skinned. The pies disappeared in minutes. The visiting crew's foreman, a grizzled man named Hank, pulled Caleb aside, and Elena caught fragments of their conversation. "You're a lucky man, Turner. Cook like that's worth her weight in gold." "I know it," Caleb said quietly. After the visitors left and the hands had dispersed to the bunkhouse, Elena sagged against the kitchen counter, every muscle aching but her spirit lighter than it had been in months. She'd done it, fed 16 men and earned their respect, proved she belonged here. "You should be proud." She turned to find Caleb in the doorway, lamplight casting his shadow long across the floor. "I am," she admitted. "Is that wrong?" "Why would it be wrong?" He moved into the kitchen, picked up a dish towel out of habit. "You worked hard, did excellent work, earned honest praise. That's worth being proud of." They washed dishes in comfortable silence, the rhythm so familiar now it felt like they'd been doing it for years instead of weeks. Elena found herself relaxing into the quiet, into the simple satisfaction of work well done, and this man's steady presence beside her. "My father would have liked you," she said suddenly. Caleb's hand stilled. "Yeah?" He appreciated people who did good work without making a show of it, who kept their word and treated people fairly. Elena rinsed a plate, handed it to him. "He'd have said you were solid." That was his highest praise, solid. "Your father sounds like he was a good man." "The best." Her throat tightened around the familiar grief. "I miss him every day." "The missing doesn't stop," Caleb said quietly, "but it changes shape, becomes something you can carry instead of something that carries you." He dried the last dish, hung up the towel. "At least that's been my experience." Their eyes met, and Elena saw her own grief reflected back, not erased or diminished, but understood. For a moment, standing in this warm kitchen with this quiet man, she felt less alone than she had in 18 months. "Thank you," she said softly, "for this job, for helping my mother, for—" She gestured vaguely at the space between them. "For understanding." Caleb nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Get some rest, Miss Harper. You earned it today." He left her standing in the warm kitchen, and Elena realized with a start that he'd never told her to call him Caleb after that first day. She'd been calling him Mr. Turner in her head, maintaining proper distance, keeping him safely categorized as employer rather than something more complicated. But standing there in the lamplight, watching his shadow disappear into darkness, she couldn't deny the truth anymore. Caleb Turner was becoming more than an employer, more than a benefactor or a business arrangement. He was becoming important, and that terrified her more than any amount of hard work ever could. The realization haunted Elena through the following days, coloring every interaction with Caleb in shades she couldn't quite name. She found herself aware of him in ways that had nothing to do with their working relationship. The way he rolled his sleeves when the kitchen grew warm, the rare moments when his careful reserve cracked into actual laughter, the gentle way he spoke to the horses when he thought no one was listening. It was dangerous, this noticing. Elena had come here out of desperation, accepted charity dressed up as employment, and the last thing she could afford was to complicate that arrangement with feelings that had no place in a transaction of labor for wages. So she threw herself into work with renewed intensity, rising earlier, staying later, perfecting recipes until the hands joked that she was trying to spoil them beyond all redemption. It was easier to focus on biscuits and roasts than to examine why her heart lifted whenever Caleb walked into the kitchen or why his rare smiles felt like gifts she wanted to earn. Margaret noticed, of course. Mothers always did. "You're working too hard," she said one evening when Elena came to the cabin after finishing the supper cleanup. Margaret sat by the window with mending in her lap, the lamplight gentle on her face. She looked better each day, color in her cheeks, strength in her movements, but her eyes were still sharp as they studied her daughter. "I'm just doing my job," Elena protested, sinking into the chair across from her mother with a weariness that went bone deep. "You're doing 3 people's jobs and running from something in the process." Margaret set down her mending. "Want to tell me what's bothering you?" Elena wanted to deny it, to deflect with the skills she'd honed over 18 months of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. But sitting in this small cabin with her mother looking healthier than she had in half a year, the defenses crumbled. "I like it here," she admitted quietly. "Too much. And that's a problem because we're not supposed to stay. This was temporary, remember? Just until you got better, until I could figure out how to save the diner." The words tasted like ash. "Except the diner's gone, and you are getting better, and I can't imagine leaving now." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her fingers smoothing the fabric in her lap. "Your father's diner meant the world to him. But you know what meant more?" Elena shook her head. "You, me, our family." Margaret's voice was firm. "Thomas Harper didn't pour his heart into that business so his daughter could martyr herself trying to keep it alive. He built it to provide for us, to give us security, and now it's gone. But we're still here, still surviving, still finding our way." "But I failed." "You adapted," Margaret corrected. "There's a difference. The world changed, circumstances changed, and you found a new path forward. That's not failure, baby. That's strength." Elena felt tears burn behind her eyes. "What if I want to stay? What if I want this to be more than temporary?" "Then stay." Margaret made it sound so simple. "Unless there's another reason you're afraid to put down roots here." The knowing look in her mother's eyes made Elena's cheeks burn. She looked away, studying the shadows on the wall. "Caleb's a good man," she said carefully. "He is. And my employer. Also true. So anything beyond that would be inappropriate, complicated." Margaret's laugh was soft but pointed. "Life's already complicated, Elena. Might as well be complicated with someone who makes you smile the way you do when he walks into a room." "I don't—" "You do. I've seen it from the window when you don't know I'm watching. The way you light up when he comes around, the way he lingers in doorways, finding excuses to talk to you." Margaret reached across and took Elena's hand. "Your father and I started with him coming into the diner every morning for coffee. Simple transaction, my coffee for his money. Took us 6 months to admit it was more than that." "That was different." "Was it? Or are you just scared to let yourself want something good after so much loss?" The question hit too close to truth. Elena had spent 18 months in survival mode, every decision filtered through the calculus of what would keep her mother alive, and the diner running. She'd forgotten how to want things for herself, how to imagine a future that held more than just endurance. What if I mess it up? The fear came out small, childlike. What if I let myself hope and it all falls apart? Then it falls apart, and you survive it the way you've survived everything else. Margaret squeezed her hand. But what if it doesn't fall apart? What if you let yourself have something good, and it turns out even better than you dared hope? Elena sat with that possibility, turning it over like a stone in her palm. What would it mean to stay here not out of necessity, but choice? To let herself belong not just to the work, but to the place, the people. The quiet man who'd offered her refuge when she needed it most. The thoughts followed her through the next days, reshaping her understanding of every small interaction. When Caleb brought her apples from the tree behind the main house because he remembered her mentioning apple pie, it wasn't just kindness, it was attention, care, the kind of noticing that came from someone who paid attention to what mattered to you. When he started timing his evening rounds to coincide with her cleanup so they could work together in comfortable silence, it wasn't coincidence, it was intention. And when he looked at her across the kitchen with something warm and unguarded in his eyes, before he caught himself and retreated behind professional distance, it wasn't imagination, it was possibility. The weather turned colder as October deepened toward November. The hands started talking about the first snow, about moving the herd to winter pasture, about all the preparations that came with settling in for the hard months ahead. Elena helped Rosa put up preserves and salt meat, their hands working in rhythm while Rosa told stories about other winters, other years. The first winter after Sarah died, I wasn't sure Caleb would make it through, Rosa said quietly, peeling apples with quick efficiency. He worked himself near to death, took every risk, volunteered for every dangerous job. Miguel finally sat him down and told him if he wanted to die, that was his choice, but he wasn't taking the rest of us down with him through his foolishness. Elena's hands stilled. What happened? He listened, pulled back from the edge, started seeing the ranch as something worth living for instead of something to distract him from grief. Rosa glanced at Elena meaningfully. You've been good for him. He smiles more now, looks forward to things instead of just enduring them. I haven't done anything special. You're here. You're alive and working and caring about the place. That's enough. Rosa set down her knife. Don't underestimate how much it matters to a lonely man when someone sees him as more than just a set of responsibilities. The conversation stayed with Elena through the afternoon as she prepared supper, pot roast with vegetables, biscuits, dried apple pie. She found herself thinking about loneliness, about the ways people built walls to survive loss, and the courage it took to let those walls down again. Caleb came in as she was pulling the pie from the oven, bringing cold air and the smell of horses. He stopped in the doorway, watching her set the pie on the cooling rack, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "Smells good," he said. "Thank you." He moved to the pump to wash, and Elena felt the weight of all the things unsaid between them. They'd developed this careful dance over the past weeks, working together, talking about safe things, maintaining the proper distance between employer and employee. But underneath ran currents neither acknowledged, growing stronger each day. "Elena," he said suddenly, and the use of her first name after weeks of Miss Harper made her turn fully to face him. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." He dried his hands slowly, carefully, the gesture buying him time to find words. "Are you happy here?" The question was simple, but the weight behind it was enormous. Elena saw in his eyes that her answer mattered, that this wasn't idle curiosity, but something deeper. "Yes," she said honestly. "Happier than I've been in a long time." Something eased in his expression. "Good. That's good." He paused, then added, "The men were asking how long you plan to stay. Tommy's worried you'll leave come spring." "And what did you tell them?" "That it was your decision to make." His eyes held hers. "But I hope you'll stay. The ranch needs you. The hands need you." Another pause, heavy with meaning. "I need you." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying in its simplicity. Elena's breath caught. "Caleb!" The kitchen door banged open, and Dusty stumbled in supporting a bleeding Jack whose face was white with pain. The moment shattered as Elena and Caleb moved simultaneously into action. "What happened?" Caleb demanded, helping ease Jack into a chair. "Horse spooked, threw him into a fence post," Dusty panted. "Gashed his leg pretty good." Blood soaked through Jack's torn pants, spreading dark and fast. Elena grabbed clean towels while Caleb carefully cut away the fabric to expose the wound, a deep laceration running from mid-thigh to just above the knee. "We need Doc Winters," Elena said, pressing towels against the bleeding. "He's in Cooperton today. Won't be back until tomorrow," Caleb said grimly. "We'll have to manage this ourselves." He sent Dusty for hot water and his medical supplies while Elena maintained pressure on the wound. Jack's face had gone from white to gray, his breathing shallow. "Sorry, boss," he managed through gritted teeth. "Stupid mistake." "Horses spook. Happens to everyone." Caleb's voice was calm, steady, the kind of calm that came from practice dealing with crisis. "You're going to be fine." Miguel arrived with Rosa, who took one look at the situation and started issuing orders in rapid Spanish. Between the four of them, they cleaned the wound, applied salve, and wrapped it tight enough to slow the bleeding. Jack bore it stoically, only gasping when the pain got too sharp. "You'll need to stay off it for at least a week," Caleb told him when they'd finished. "Rosa will make up a bed in the main house where we can keep an eye on you." "I can work." "You can rest," Caleb said firmly. "That's an order." They settled Jack in the small room off the kitchen that Sarah had used for sewing, making him comfortable with pillows and blankets. Elena brought him water and a plate of food he barely touched, his face still gray with pain and blood loss. "Miss Elena," he said as she tucked another blanket around him. "Sorry for ruining supper." "You didn't ruin anything. Just focus on healing." She paused, then added gently, "Would you like me to sit with you for a while?" Relief flooded his face. "Would you mind? It's just, the quiet makes it worse somehow." So Elena pulled up a chair and sat with him, talking about nothing important, the weather, the cattle, Tommy's terrible jokes. She told him stories about the diner, about her father's regular customers and their quirks, about the time Mrs. Chen brought her own teacup because she swore it made the water taste better. She talked until Jack's breathing evened out and sleep finally claimed him. When she emerged from the room, she found Caleb waiting in the kitchen, the supper dishes already washed and put away. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "You were busy." He studied her face. "You're good with him. Knew just what he needed. My father used to say everybody just wants to feel less alone when they're hurting. Your father was a wise man." Caleb moved toward the door, then paused. "What I said earlier, before... I know." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "And I need to tell you something, too." He turned back, waiting. "I want to stay," she said quietly. "Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this feels like home now. The ranch, the work, the people." She took a breath, gathered courage. "You." The words hung between them, honest and frightening and necessary. Caleb's expression shifted through surprise, hope, something deeper that made Elena's breath catch. "Elena." A crash from Jack's room sent them both running. They found him on the floor, his leg bleeding again through the bandages, his face contorted with pain. The bedside table had overturned, water spreading across the floor. "Tried to get up," Jack gasped. "Dizzy." They got him back into bed, changed the bandages, checked the wound for fresh damage. It took an hour to settle him again, and by the time they finished, the moment for speaking had passed. Caleb left to check on the rest of the hands, and Elena sat with Jack through the night, listening to his restless breathing and thinking about interrupted conversations and terrible timing. Morning came gray and cold, bringing Doc Winters on his regular rounds. He examined Jack's leg with gentle efficiency, nodding approval at their field medicine. "You did good work here," he told Caleb and Elena. "Saved the leg, maybe saved his life. Another hour without treatment, and he might have bled out." "It was mostly Elena," Caleb said. "She kept her head when I was ready to panic." Doc Winters smiled at her. "Your father would be proud. He had steady hands in a crisis, too." The praise warmed her, but it was Caleb's words that stayed with her through the day. He'd given her credit she wasn't sure she deserved, elevated her actions to heroism when she'd just done what needed doing. It was one more piece of understanding who Caleb Turner was, a man who noticed people's contributions and acknowledged them without diminishing his own role. Jack's injury changed the rhythm of the household. Elena split her time between cooking and nursing, checking his fever, and changing bandages, making sure he ate and drank enough. Rosa helped when she could, but her duties with the chickens and garden kept her busy. So it fell mostly to Elena, and she found herself oddly content in the caretaking. "You missed your calling," Jack told her one afternoon when she brought him broth and fresh bread. "Should have been a nurse instead of a cook."
Maybe I'm both," Elena said, settling into the chair by his bed. "My father always said the best cooking was healing work anyway."
He was right about that. Your food does something to a man's soul, not just his stomach. They talked easily now, the crisis having broken down the formal walls between them. Jack told her about growing up in Texas, about the older brother who'd taught him to ride, and the sister who'd married a teacher and moved to California. He spoke of his dreams of having his own small ranch someday, nothing fancy, just enough land for a few cattle and a garden. "What about you?" he asked. "What do you dream about when you let yourself dream?" Elena considered the question. A month ago, she would have said saving the diner, honoring her father's legacy. But sitting in this warm room in a ranch that had somehow become home, her dreams had shifted into something new. "I dream about belonging somewhere," she said honestly. "About doing work that matters and being surrounded by people who value it. About my mother being healthy and happy. About—" She stopped, suddenly shy. "About the boss?" Jack's eyes were knowing but kind. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to anyone with eyes." He smiled. "For what it's worth, he looks at you the same way. Has since you got here, though he's been fighting it something fierce." "Why fight it?" "Because Caleb's a careful man. Doesn't do anything halfway, doesn't risk his heart on uncertainty. Lost too much when Sarah died to take chances lightly." Jack shifted in the bed, wincing. "But I've known him 8 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Not even Sarah, and he loved her true." The words settled over Elena like snow, soft and transforming. She wanted to ask more, to understand what Jack saw that gave him such certainty. But the sound of boots on the porch signaled Caleb's return, and the moment passed. Caleb came in stamping snow from his boots. The first snow of the season had started falling an hour ago, light and tentative. He brought the cold with him, along with the kind of weariness that came from hard physical labor. "How's the patient?" he asked, moving to the bed to check Jack's color. "Bored out of my mind, but healing," Jack reported. "Miss Elena's been keeping me entertained with stories." "Good." Caleb's eyes met Elena's over Jack's bed, and something warm passed between them. "Could I borrow her for a minute?" "Ranch business." They stepped into the kitchen, and Caleb closed the door behind them. The snow was falling heavier now, visible through the window, turning the world soft and quiet. "Everything all right?" Elena asked. "Need to make a supply run to Cooperton before the weather gets worse. Probably be gone 3-4 days." He hesitated. "Normally I'd take one of the hands, but with Jack down and winter work piling up, I need them all here." "You're going alone?" "Unless you have another suggestion." Elena understood what he wasn't saying, that he was asking if she'd be all right here without him, if she trusted him to leave her in charge of feeding the hands and caring for Jack. It was responsibility and respect wrapped together. "We'll be fine," she said firmly. "Rosa and I can manage things. Miguel can handle any emergencies." Caleb nodded, but didn't move toward the door. The snow fell outside, and the kitchen felt warm and private, separate from the rest of the world. "The other night," he said quietly. "What you said about wanting to stay. Did you mean it?" Elena's heart kicked against her ribs. "Yes. Not just until your mother's better, not just until something else comes along. I meant permanently, if you'll have me." The words came out braver than she felt, laying her cards on the table without hedging or retreat. Caleb's expression shifted, something fierce and tender moving across his face. "I'll have you," he said, his voice rough. "Elena, I've wanted to ask you to stay since the second week you were here. Wanted to tell you that you belong on this ranch, in this house, in my—" He stopped, shook his head. "But it didn't seem fair to ask when you came here out of desperation. Wanted you to have choices, not feel trapped." "I don't feel trapped."
Elena stepped closer, her courage building with each word. I feel home. The distance between them was nothing now, just a few feet of kitchen floor and years of careful walls coming down. Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat, and cupped her face in his work-roughened hand. I need to say something before I lose my nerve, he said. I care about you, Elena Harper.
More than an employer should, more than is probably wise given how recent all this is. But I'm tired of pretending otherwise. Then don't pretend. Elena covered his hand with hers. I care about you too. Have for weeks now, even though I tried not to. He smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his whole face. Seems we've both been fighting a losing battle. Seems so. They stood like that, close enough to feel each other's breath, the moment stretching sweet and terrifying. Then Caleb stepped back, his hand falling away, and Elena felt the loss of contact like cold water. I need to leave before the snow gets worse, he said, regret clear in his voice. But when I get back, we'll talk properly, about what this means, where we go from here. I'll be waiting, Elena promised. He left her standing in the warm kitchen, and through the window she watched him disappear into the swirling snow, already counting the days until his return. The snow fell steadily through the first day of Caleb's absence, transforming the ranch into something from a winter tale. Elena woke to a world gone white and quiet. The familiar landscape softened under 6 inches of fresh powder. She stood at the cabin window, watching dawn break pink and gold over the mountains, and felt the weight of his absence already settling into her bones. Margaret stirred in the bedroom, her cough barely a whisper, now compared to the terrible rattle it had been just weeks ago. Elena brought her mother tea and toast, settling at the foot of the bed while Margaret ate with an appetite that still surprised them both. You're worried about him, Margaret observed, reading her daughter's face with a mother's accuracy. The snow makes travel dangerous. The snow makes you realize how much you care. Margaret set down her teacup. There's a difference. Elena couldn't deny it. She'd spent the night listening to the wind and imagining Caleb caught in the storm, his horse gone lame, Caleb himself freezing in some snow-covered ravine. The vividness of her fears had shocked her. When had he become so essential that his absence felt like missing a limb? I told him I wanted to stay, she admitted quietly. Told him this felt like home. Margaret's smile was knowing and tender. And what did he say? That he cared about me. That when he got back, we'd talk properly about what it means. Elena twisted her hands in her lap. What if something happens to him before we get that chance? Then you'll survive it the way you've survived everything else. Margaret reached out and took Elena's hands, stopping their restless movement. But borrowing trouble from tomorrow won't protect you from anything except the joy of today. He's a capable man, Elena. Trust him to come back to you. The words helped, a little. Elena carried them through the morning routine, feeding the hands their breakfast, checking on Jack, whose leg was healing clean and straight, organizing the day's tasks with Rosa and Miguel. The hands were subdued without Caleb's steady presence, working with less of their usual banter. Even Tommy was quiet, his young face serious as he headed out to check the cattle in the high pasture. They feel it too, Rosa said, watching them go. How much this place runs on that man's strength. Not just his orders, but his spirit. He steadies everyone just by being here. Elena understood completely. She'd felt that steadiness from the first day, the way Caleb's quiet competence made impossible things feel manageable. Without it, the ranch felt slightly off balance, like a scale missing its counterweight. The second day brought wind that howled through the eaves and piled snow and drifts against the buildings. Elena fought her way to the main house through waist-deep powder, her skirt soaked and heavy by the time she reached the kitchen. She found Jack trying to stand on his injured leg, his face white with determination and pain. What are you doing? She rushed to support him before he fell. Can't just lie here while everyone else works, he protested, even as he sagged against her. Not when the boss is gone and the weather's turned mean. You'll tear open that wound and be useless for months instead of weeks. Elena guided him firmly back to bed. Let your body heal, Jack. That's the work you need to do right now. He subsided reluctantly, but the restlessness in his eyes reflected what she felt in her own chest. Everyone was waiting. For Caleb's return, for the weather to break,
for some resolution to the tension that had settled over the ranch like the snow itself. Elena threw herself into cooking, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms.
She made beef stew rich with vegetables and herbs, biscuits that came out golden and perfect, dried apple pie that filled the kitchen with cinnamon sweetness. The hands ate gratefully, their compliments sincere, but she caught them glancing toward the door as if expecting Caleb to walk through it any moment. "He'll be back when the weather clears," Miguel assured her that evening, reading the worry she tried to hide. "Caleb knows these mountains better than anyone. He won't take foolish risks." But that night, lying in her narrow bed listening to the wind scream, Elena couldn't stop imagining all the risks that weren't foolish but still dangerous. A horse's misstep, a sudden whiteout, temperatures that dropped below survivable. She'd lost her father to sudden death, knew too well how quickly the world could shift from normal to nightmare. The third morning dawned clear and brutally cold, the sky a hard blue that promised no mercy. Elena was pulling biscuits from the oven when she heard shouting from outside. Not alarm exactly, but excitement. She rushed to the window and saw Tommy racing toward the house, waving his arms. "Rider coming!" he yelled. "Coming fast!" Elena's heart leaped into her throat. She abandoned the biscuits and ran to the door, Miguel and Rosa close behind her. The rider emerged from the tree line at a full gallop, horse and man both laboring through the deep snow. As he drew closer, Elena recognized not Caleb, but a stranger, his face raw with cold and fear. He nearly fell from his horse, Miguel catching him before he hit the ground. "Need help," the man gasped, his words slurred with exhaustion. "Wagon overturned 3 miles south, woman and child trapped. Been trying to dig them out all night, but the snow keeps coming. Please." "How many in your party?" Miguel demanded. "Just me and my wife and our daughter. Heading to Cooperton when the axle broke and we went over." The man's eyes were desperate. "My wife's hurt bad. The little one's scared but unhurt. I can't get them free alone." Miguel was already moving, calling orders to the hands. "Tommy, Luis, get the wagon ready. Pete, gather rope and shovels. Sam, pull together medical supplies and blankets." "I'm coming too," Elena said firmly. Miguel started to protest, but Rosa cut him off. "She's right. If the woman's injured, she'll need tending. Elena's got steady hands and a calm head." They assembled quickly, Elena grabbing her warmest coat and filling a basket with supplies. Clean cloths, salve, laudanum from Caleb's medicine chest, a flask of whiskey. Jack tried to rise from his bed to help, but Elena pushed him back down with a look that brooked no argument. The journey was brutal, the wagon lurching through snowdrifts that sometimes reached the horses' bellies. The stranger, his name was James Whitfield, rode alongside, his face gray with exhaustion and fear. He'd been trying to free his family for 12 hours, working until his hands bled and his strength gave out. They found the overturned wagon in a ravine, half buried in snow and leaning at a sickening angle. Elena could hear crying from inside, a child's voice, high and terrified. The hands immediately set to work with shovels and ropes, digging out the snow that had piled against the wagon's side. Elena crawled through the small opening they created, her heart pounding. Inside was chaos, scattered belongings, broken wood, and a woman pinned beneath a trunk that had shifted in the crash. Her face was pale as moonlight, blood seeping from a gash on her forehead. Beside her huddled a girl of perhaps 6, her eyes huge with terror. "Hello, sweetheart," Elena said softly, keeping her voice calm despite the fear clawing at her chest. "My name's Elena. I'm here to help your mama." "Mama won't wake up right," the child whispered. "I've been trying to wake her, but she just keeps sleeping." Elena moved carefully in the cramped space, assessing the situation with the practical clarity her father had taught her. The woman, Mary, James had called her, was conscious but clearly in shock, her breathing shallow and her skin clammy despite the cold. The trunk pinning her was too heavy for Elena to shift alone, but she could see no blood beyond the head wound, no obvious breaks. "Can you hear me, Mary?" Elena asked gently, touching the woman's hand. Mary's eyes focused on her with effort. "My daughter is safe and unharmed. We're going to get you both out of here." Elena raised her voice. "Miguel, I need help moving this trunk." It took 3 men and careful maneuvering, but they finally shifted the trunk enough to free Mary. She cried out when they moved her, clutching at her ribs.
and Elena suspected cracked bones, if not broken ones.
They fashioned a litter from rope and canvas, lifting Mary out with painstaking care, while Elena kept the little girl, Emma, occupied with questions about her doll and favorite foods. The journey back to the ranch was slower, every jolt and bump drawing whimpers from Mary despite the laudanum Elena had given her. Emma rode in Elena's lap, her small body shaking with cold and delayed shock. Elena wrapped her in blankets and told her stories about the ranch, about the horses and chickens, and the silly things Tommy said that made everyone laugh. "Will my mama die?" Emma asked in a small voice. Elena thought of her own mother, of how close they'd come to loss, of all the ways the world could take people you loved. But she looked at this child's frightened face and chose hope over honesty. "Your mama is very strong, and we're going to take good care of her, the best care there is." They settled Mary in Elena's own bed in the cabin, Elena and Rosa working together to clean the head wound and bind the ribs that were indeed cracked. Margaret appeared in the doorway, took one look at the situation, and immediately began organizing, sending Rosa for hot water, directing James to the fire to warm himself, settling Emma with warm milk and gentle words. "You should be resting," Elena protested, but her mother waved her off. "I've been resting for months. Time to be useful again." Margaret's eyes were bright with purpose. "Besides, this child needs grandmothering, and I'm fresh out of practice." Elena watched her mother settle Emma by the fire, wrapping her in quilts and coaxing out her story, and felt something tight in her chest ease. This was what healing looked like, not just the absence of illness, but the return of strength and purpose. Doc Winters arrived the next morning, summoned by one of the hands who'd ridden through the night to fetch him. He examined Mary with gentle thoroughness, nodding approval at Elena's field medicine. "You've got the touch for this," he told her. "Cracked ribs, mild concussion, some bruising, but nothing that won't heal with time and rest. You likely saved her life by keeping her warm and still during transport." The praise warmed her, but it was the look on James Whitfield's face that mattered most, gratitude so profound it brought tears to his weathered eyes. "We got nowhere to go," he admitted later, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee warming his hands. "Was heading to Cooperton hoping to find work, but we got no money for a room, no way to care for Mary while she heals." His voice cracked. "I don't know what to do." "You stay here," Elena said firmly, the decision made before she'd fully thought it through. "We've got room, and Mary needs time to recover. You can help around the ranch in exchange for your keep." Miguel nodded agreement. "We can always use another hand, especially with winter coming on hard. You know your way around horses?" "Been working with them since I was Emma's age." "Then it's settled." Miguel stood, offering his hand. "Welcome to the CT." The household reorganized itself around the new arrivals. James moved into the bunkhouse with the other hands, proving himself capable and grateful. Emma attached herself to Margaret, following her everywhere and chattering constantly in the way of lonely children who'd finally found a safe audience. Mary healed slowly, her strength returning in small increments, and she insisted on helping however she could, mending clothes, peeling vegetables, watching Emma so Elena could work. "You've given us so much," Mary said one afternoon, her eyes wet with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. We help each other here. That's what families do." The words came out before Elena realized she meant them absolutely. This ranch, these people, they'd become family in the weeks she'd been here. Not the family she was born into, but the family she'd chosen and been chosen by. The 4th day of Caleb's absence passed, then the 5th. The weather cleared to hard cold and brilliant sunshine, the snow glittering like diamonds across the valley. Elena found herself watching the southern road whenever she had a spare moment, her heart jumping at every distant movement that might be a rider. The hands noticed, trading knowing looks when they thought she wasn't watching. Even Emma picked up on it, asking in her innocent way why Miss Elena kept looking out the window. "She's waiting for someone special," Margaret explained with a gentle smile. "Like waiting for Papa to come home?" "Exactly like that, sweetheart." On the 6th day, Elena was preparing supper when she heard hoofbeats in the yard. She told herself not to hope, not to assume, but her feet carried her to the door anyway. And there he was, Caleb Turner, on his big bay horse, snow still clinging to his coat, his face weary but whole and real and here. Their eyes met across the yard, and Elena saw her own relief reflected back at her. He dismounted stiffly, favoring his left leg, and Tommy rushed to take his horse. But Caleb's gaze never left Elena's face as he crossed the yard, climbed the porch steps, stopped just inches from where she stood in the doorway. "You're back," she said, her voice unsteady. "I'm back." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't known she'd shed. "Were you worried?" "Terrified," she admitted. "Every day. Every hour." Something fierce and tender moved across his face. "I'm sorry. The storm delayed everything, and then the pass was blocked." He shook his head. "But I'm here now, and we need to talk." "There's something you should know first." Elena gestured toward the cabin where smoke rose from the chimney. "We have guests, a family whose wagon overturned in the storm. I told them they could stay." She waited for anger, for questions about her authority to make such decisions. Instead, Caleb smiled, tired but genuine. "Of course you did, because you've got your father's heart for helping people." His hand fell from her face, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. "We'll talk after supper. There are things I need to say that won't wait any longer." He left her trembling in the doorway, and Elena returned to the kitchen in a daze. The hands welcomed Caleb back with backslaps and questions. Emma stared at him with wide eyes until Margaret introduced them, and Mary and James expressed their gratitude with voices thick with emotion. Through it all, Elena felt Caleb's attention on her like a physical touch, his eyes finding hers across the crowded kitchen with a heat that made her breath catch. Supper was chaotic and joyful, the table crowded with extra bodies and conversation flowing like wine. Caleb sat at the head of the table where he always did, but his manner was different, more relaxed, more open, as if something had shifted during his time away. He told stories about his trip, making even the difficult parts sound like adventures, drawing laughter from Emma and approving nods from the hands. Elena served and listened and felt her heart expanding with something too large to name. This was what she'd been seeking without knowing it. Not just a job or a safe place for her mother, but belonging, community, the messy, beautiful chaos of people caring for each other. After supper, after the dishes were washed and the guests settled and the hands dispersed to the bunkhouse, Caleb found Elena in the kitchen. She was wiping down the stove, her movements automatic, her mind already racing toward the conversation ahead. "Walk with me?" he asked quietly. She nodded, pulling on her coat and following him into the cold night. The stars were brilliant overhead, hard and bright in the clear air. Their breath plumed white, and their boots crunched in the frozen snow. Caleb led her away from the buildings, toward the small rise that overlooked the valley. "I did a lot of thinking on that trip," he said when they stopped. The ranch spread below them like a child's toy in the moonlight. "About what I want, what I'm willing to risk, about you." Elena waited, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I loved my wife," Caleb continued, his voice steady. "Sarah was my first love, and losing her nearly destroyed me. I swore I'd never risk that kind of pain again, never open myself up to loss like that." He turned to face Elena fully. "And then you showed up desperate and determined, and before I knew it, you'd worked your way past every defense I'd built." "Caleb, let me finish, please. I need to say this." He took a breath. "These 6 days away, all I could think about was getting back to you. Not the ranch, not my responsibilities, you. The way you laugh at Tommy's terrible jokes, the way you take care of everyone without asking for anything back, the way you've made this place feel alive again." His hands found hers, warm despite the cold. "I'm in love with you, Elena Harper. Have been for weeks now. Maybe from that first morning when you made biscuits in my kitchen, like you'd been doing it your whole life." The words struck her breathless, joy and terror warring in her chest. "I love you too," she said, the admission spilling out urgent and honest. "I tried not to, told myself it was inappropriate and complicated and too fast. But it's true anyway." Caleb's smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. "Nothing about us has been conventional. Met under desperate circumstances, started as employer and employee, fell in love over dish soap and dinner conversation." He squeezed her hands. "But I don't care about conventional. I care about you, about us, about building something real." What are you saying? I'm saying I want you to stay permanently. Not as my cook, though you can keep cooking if you want. As my wife, if you'll have me. His voice shook slightly. I know it's fast, I know we're still learning each other, but I'm sure enough for both of us if you need time to be sure. Elena felt tears spill hot down her cold cheeks. I'm already sure. Have been since the night you told me you needed me, maybe before. She laughed, the sound watery and joyful. Yes, Caleb Turner. I'll marry you. He pulled her close then, his arms wrapping around her, and Elena buried her face against his chest, breathing in leather and pine and home. They stood like that under the vast sky, holding each other against the cold and the past and every fear that had tried to keep them apart. When they finally pulled back, Caleb cupped her face in both hands and kissed her, gentle and sure and full of promise. Elena kissed him back, pouring every ounce of her hope and love and commitment into it. This was choosing herself, choosing joy, choosing a future that looked nothing like what she'd planned, but everything like what she needed. Your mother, Caleb said when they broke apart, both breathless. Does she know how you feel? Mothers always know. Elena smiled through her tears. She'll be thrilled. She's been telling me for weeks to stop being afraid of wanting good things. Smart woman. He took her hand, threading their fingers together. We'll do this right. Proper courtship. Time for you to be certain. Wedding when you're ready. I can be patient. I don't want patient, Elena said firmly. I want a life with you, and I don't want to waste time pretending otherwise. We've both lost enough. Let's not lose any more days to fear or propriety. Caleb studied her face in the moonlight, searching for hesitation. Finding none, his smile grew. Christmas, then. We'll marry at Christmas, give us time to plan and tell people, but not so long you can change your mind. I won't change my mind. Neither will I. They walked back to the house hand in hand, their future settled and sure between them. Tomorrow would bring questions and plans, announcements and preparations. But tonight was just for them. Two people who'd found each other in desperation and chose each other in joy, building a home from grief and hope and the courage to try again. When they reached the cabin, Margaret took one look at their joined hands and clasped faces and started crying. Finally, she said, pulling them both into a fierce hug. Thomas would be so happy. So happy. Elena let herself be held by her mother and the man she loved, and felt the last pieces of her broken heart slot back into place. Not the same as before. Grief had changed its shape permanently, but whole again, in a new configuration that held room for loss and love both. Mama, she said softly, we're getting married at Christmas. Margaret pulled back, her face wet with tears and radiant with joy. Then we have a wedding to plan, and Elena... She cupped her daughter's face the way she had when Elena was small. I'm so proud of you for surviving, for choosing this, for letting yourself love again. I learned from the best, Elena said. That night, lying in her narrow bed with her mother sleeping peacefully in the next room and her future husband just across the yard, Elena let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. She'd come to this ranch broken and desperate, willing to trade anything for her mother's life. And somehow, in the process of saving Margaret, she'd saved herself. Found work that mattered, people who valued her, and a love that felt like coming home. The diner was gone. Her father was gone. The life she'd planned and the dreams she'd held were gone. But in their place was something better, built from ashes and determination and the quiet strength of a man who'd recognized her worth when she'd forgotten it herself. This ranch, these people, this love, they were her future now. Not a compromise or a consolation prize, but an actual gift. And for the first time since her father's death, Elena fell asleep with a smile on her face and hope bright and certain in her heart. Morning brought the news spreading through the ranch like wildfire. Elena woke to find Rosa already at the cabin door, her face split by a grin so wide it looked almost painful. Miguel told me, Rosa said, pulling Elena into a bone-crushing hug before she'd even finished tying her robe. About time that man came to his senses. And you too, mija. I was starting to think you were both too stubborn to admit what everyone else could see. Margaret emerged from the bedroom, already dressed despite the early hour, her face glowing with the kind of joy that made her look 10 years younger. The whole ranch will know by breakfast. You ready for that? Elena thought about facing the hands, about their teasing and questions and inevitable ribbing of Caleb. But more than that, she thought about walking into that kitchen as Caleb's intended, about the rightness of claiming that place openly instead of hiding behind propriety. I'm ready, she said. The kitchen was already full when she arrived. The hands gathered around the table with coffee and the kind of anticipation men get when they know something important is coming. Caleb stood by the stove, and when Elena entered, he crossed to her immediately, taking her hand in front of everyone. Morning, he said, his voice carrying that rare warmth that softened all his edges. Morning. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but didn't pull away. Tommy let out a whoop that made everyone jump. I knew it! Pete, you owe me $5. I said they'd be engaged before Christmas. They ain't engaged yet, Pete protested, but he was grinning. Boss hasn't made it official. Caleb turned to face his men, Elena's hand still clasped in his. She's agreed to marry me. Wedding set for Christmas Day. Any of you have a problem with that? The resounding "No, boss" shook the rafters, followed by a chaos of congratulations and backslapping that would have been overwhelming if it wasn't so genuine. Dusty produced a flask from somewhere and insisted everyone take a celebratory drink, even though it was barely past dawn. Luis started singing something in Spanish that made Rosa swat him with a dish towel, while Miguel laughed so hard he had to sit down. Even Jack, still confined to his bed but healing well, called out from his room demanding to know what the commotion was about. When Tommy yelled back the news, Jack's response was colorful enough to make Elena blush and eloquent enough to make Margaret laugh. Never seen the boss this happy, Sam said quietly to Elena as the chaos swirled around them. Not even before Sarah died. This is different. Better. The word settled warm in Elena's chest. She'd worried about comparisons to Sarah, about living in the shadow of Caleb's first love. But Sam's observation suggested something else, that what she and Caleb had wasn't a replacement or a second best, but its own thing entirely, built on different foundations, shaped by different circumstances, but no less real for being different. Breakfast that morning was more celebration than meal, the conversation loud and full of plans. The hands immediately started organizing among themselves. Who would ride to town to spread the news? Who would handle extra ranch work so Caleb could focus on wedding preparations? Who would build what, and fix what, and contribute what to make Christmas Day special? We'll need decorations, Rosa declared, pine garlands and candles, and food. So much food. We'll invite everyone from the neighboring ranches, make it a real celebration. My sister in Cooperton does beautiful sewing, Mary offered shyly from where she sat with Emma. If you needed a dress made, I could write to her. She owes me a favor. Elena found herself overwhelmed by the outpouring of help and care. These people who'd been strangers 2 months ago now organizing her wedding with the dedication of family. She caught Caleb's eye across the table and saw the same emotion reflected there. Gratitude and wonder that they'd found this, that they'd somehow stumbled into belonging. The days that followed blurred into a flurry of activity. Margaret threw herself into planning with the energy of someone who'd been waiting years to organize her daughter's wedding. She and Rosa became co-conspirators, disappearing for hours to discuss flowers and music and all the details Elena barely had time to think about between cooking and ranch work. Mary's sister arrived 3 days later with her sewing kit and an armload of fabric, having closed her Cooperton shop for a week to help with the dress. She was a tiny woman named Sarah. The coincidence of the name made both Elena and Caleb pause, but then Sarah the seamstress smiled and said, "It's a good name. Means princess. You'll be a beautiful bride." The dress took shape slowly, cream-colored wool with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Elena stood for fittings while Sarah pinned and adjusted, Margaret hovering nearby with suggestions. It was simple but elegant, practical enough for ranch life, but special enough to feel like the occasion demanded. "Your father would have loved this," Margaret said one evening, her fingers tracing the embroidery. "He always said when you got married, he'd walk you down the aisle so proud he'd probably trip over his own feet." The grief that rose was sharp, but no longer consuming. Elena let herself feel it, let the tears come, but found they mixed now with joy instead of drowning it. Her father wasn't here to see this, but she carried his love forward. That had to be enough.
Caleb courted her properly despite their engagement, stealing moments between work to walk with her or sit on the cabin porch talking until the stars came out. They spoke about everything, their childhoods, their losses, their hopes for the future. Caleb told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father's harsh expectations, and his mother's gentle wisdom. About meeting Sarah when they were both 16 and knowing immediately she was meant to be his. "I loved her completely," he said one night, his voice steady but soft. "And when she died, I thought that was it for me. One great love in a lifetime, and mine was over." "What changed?" Elena asked. "You did." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "You showed me that the heart's capacity for love isn't limited, that losing someone doesn't mean you can't find someone else, just that what you find will be different." He turned to look at her directly. "I love you, Elena. Not the same way I loved Sarah, but no less true. Maybe more, because this time I know how precious it is, how easily it can be lost." Elena understood completely. She loved Caleb with the fierce knowledge of someone who'd already survived loss, who knew that nothing was guaranteed and everything was precious. It made their love more intentional, more conscious, more grateful. The ranch prepared for Christmas with the kind of enthusiasm that came from people who'd had too many hard years and were ready to celebrate something good. The hands cut pine boughs and wove them into garlands that decorated every doorway. Someone produced candles that smelled of beeswax and cinnamon. Miguel carved a nativity scene from cottonwood, the figures rough but beautiful in their simplicity. James Whitfield proved himself invaluable, throwing himself into ranch work with the dedication of a man repaying a debt. He was good with horses, patient with the younger hands, and willing to tackle any job. Caleb offered him permanent employment, and James accepted with tears in his eyes. "You saved my family," he told Caleb and Elena one evening. "Gave us a home when we had nothing. I'll work for you as long as you'll have me." "Then you'll be here a long time," Caleb said simply. Mary regained her strength week by week, insisting on helping Rosa in the kitchen despite everyone's protests that she should rest. Emma bloomed under Margaret's attention, the fearful child who'd huddled in that overturned wagon, transforming into a bright, chattering presence, who followed Margaret everywhere and called her grandmother Margaret without anyone suggesting it. "She needs you," Elena told her mother. "The way I needed you." "And I needed her," Margaret admitted. "Needed a purpose beyond just surviving. That child gave me a reason to get strong again." Doc Winters came for his regular visits and pronounced Margaret's recovery nothing short of miraculous. "The consumption's still there," he cautioned, "but it's dormant, sleeping. As long as she keeps getting good air, good food, and good reasons to live, she could have years yet." Years. The word was a gift Elena hadn't dared hope for. She held it close, let it reshape her understanding of the future. Years to watch her mother with Emma, years to build a life with Caleb, years to belong to this place and these people. The neighboring ranches sent representatives to offer congratulations and fishing for wedding invitations. Elena and Caleb decided to keep it small, just the ranch family and closest neighbors, maybe 30 people total. Enough to celebrate properly, but not so many it stopped feeling personal. The Double R's foreman, Hank, showed up one afternoon with a young bull as a wedding gift. "Finest breeding stock in 3 territories," he declared. "Figure you'll need to start building that herd for all the children you'll be having." Elena blushed scarlet while Caleb accepted graciously, though she caught the pleased look in his eye at the mention of children. They hadn't discussed it explicitly yet, but the idea settled warm in her chest. Children running through this ranch, learning to ride and cook and work the land. A family built not just from blood, but from choice and love and determination. Tommy approached Elena nervously one evening after supper, his young face serious. "Miss Elena, I got something to ask you." "What is it, Tommy?" "Well, with the wedding coming and all, and you becoming the boss's wife." He twisted his hat in his hands. "Does that mean you'll stop cooking for us? Because I don't think I can go back to beans and jerky after tasting your biscuits." Elena laughed, touched by his concern. "I'll still cook, Tommy. Being married doesn't change that. This ranch is my home, and feeding the people I care about is part of that." His relief was palpable. Thank the stars. Dusty was saying we might have to learn to cook for ourselves, and I about died at the thought. "Dusty was teasing you." "I know, but still." Tommy grinned. It's good. You being here permanent. The ranch feels right again. Feels like a home instead of just a place we work.
After he left, Elena stood in the quiet kitchen thinking about his words. A home instead of just a place we work. That's what she'd helped build here. Not through any grand gestures, but through the simple act of caring. Cooking meals with attention, noticing what people needed, creating space for laughter and belonging. It was her father's legacy, she realized. Not the diner itself, but the philosophy behind it. That food was love made tangible. That taking care of people's hunger meant taking care of their hearts too. She'd brought that here, planted it in this ranch's soil, and watched it grow into something beautiful. The week before Christmas brought a cold snap that froze the creek solid and turned breath to ice crystals in the air. The hands worked double time to make sure the cattle had access to water, breaking ice daily and hauling feed to the far pastures. Elena kept the kitchen warm and the coffee flowing, providing hot meals at odd hours for men who came in half frozen from their work. Caleb worked alongside his hands, refusing to stay inside while they labored in the cold. Elena watched him from the kitchen window, his strength, his leadership, the way the other men looked to him, not just for orders, but for example. She was marrying a good man, she thought, a man her father would have respected, and her mother already loved. 3 days before Christmas, the minister arrived from Cooperton, a jovial man named Reverend Walsh, who'd known Caleb since he was a boy. He stayed for supper, blessed the household, and spent the evening discussing the ceremony with Elena and Caleb while the hands tried not to obviously eavesdrop from the next room. I married Caleb and Sarah, Reverend Walsh said gently, and I'll tell you what I told them. Marriage is work, beautiful work, but work nonetheless. You'll have hard days, days when you wonder why you chose this. But if you keep choosing each other, keep showing up even when it's hard, you'll build something that lasts. We will, Elena said firmly, and felt Caleb's hand find hers under the table. Christmas Eve dawned clear and brilliant, the world transformed by another night's snow into something magical. The ranch glittered like it had been dusted with diamonds, and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe, but so clear you could see for miles. Elena woke with butterflies in her stomach and her mother's hand on her shoulder. Morning, bride, Margaret said softly. How are you feeling? Terrified. Excited. Sure. Elena sat up, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. All of it at once. That's how you should feel. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed. I felt the same way the morning I married your father. Woke up thinking, this is it. This is the day my whole life changes. And I was right. It did change. For the better. They spent the morning together, the quiet intimacy of mother and daughter before everything shifted. Rosa and Sarah, the seamstress, arrived with the dress, and Elena let them fuss over her, fixing her hair and adjusting the fit and declaring her beautiful enough to make Caleb forget his own name. He won't know what hit him, Rosa said with satisfaction. That man is going to take one look at you walking toward him and forget how to breathe. Emma appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide. Miss Elena, you look like a princess from my storybook. Come here, sweetheart. Elena held out her arms, and Emma ran to her, careful not to muss the dress. Thank you for being here today. It means the world to me. Are you scared? Emma asked with a child's directness. A little, but the good kind of scared, the kind that means something important is happening. Papa says important things should be scary because that's how you know they matter. Elena smiled. Your papa is a wise man. The ceremony was set for 2 o'clock in the main house's great room, which the hands had transformed. Garlands hung from every beam, candles glowed on every surface, and someone had built a beautiful arch from pine boughs and winter berries. The room smelled of evergreen and wood smoke and possibility. The guests arrived bundled against the cold, neighboring ranchers and their families, Doc Winters from Redfield, a few townspeople who'd known Thomas Harper and wanted to see his daughter married. They filled the room with warmth and good wishes, and Elena felt her nervousness ease under their collective affection. Tommy and Luis played fiddle and guitar, filling the room with music that was simple but heartfelt. Margaret stood at the front with Reverend Walsh, her face radiant despite the tears already streaming down her cheeks. The hands lined the walls in their Sunday best, looking uncomfortable in clean shirts and slicked back hair, but grinning like children. And then Caleb entered, and the room went still. He wore a black suit that Elena had never seen, his hair freshly cut, his jaw cleanly shaved. But it wasn't the clothes that struck her breathless. It was the look on his face when he saw her. Wonder and love and something almost like disbelief, as if he couldn't quite accept that this was real, that she was his. Their eyes met across the room, and Elena felt everything else fall away. The guests, the decorations, the music, none of it mattered as much as the man standing at the front of the room waiting for her, offering her his name and his home and his heart. Miguel appeared at her elbow. "May I?" he asked quietly. "I know I'm not your father, but I'd be honored," Elena said, her throat tight with emotion. Miguel offered his arm and Elena took it, letting him walk her down the makeshift aisle. She passed Rosa, who was already crying into a handkerchief, past Mary and James with Emma between them, all three smiling, past Jack, still favoring his healing leg, but standing proud in his Sunday clothes, past the hands who'd become brothers, who'd accepted her into their rough family without hesitation. And then she was standing beside Caleb, Miguel stepping back, and it was just the two of them facing Reverend Walsh, with their future hanging in the balance. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Walsh began, his voice carrying warmth and authority, "we are gathered here in the sight of this community to join Caleb Michael Turner and Elena Rose Harper in holy matrimony." The words washed over Elena in a blur of traditional phrases and sacred promises. She heard herself responding at the appropriate moments, felt Caleb's hand warm and steady in hers. But mostly she was aware of the enormity of what they were doing. Two broken people choosing to build something whole together. Two survivors deciding that the risk of loss was worth the gift of love. "Caleb," Reverend Walsh said, "do you take Elena to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Caleb's eyes never left Elena's face. "I do." "Elena, do you take Caleb to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Elena thought of her father, of the diner she'd lost, of the desperate girl she'd been just months ago. Thought of her mother breathing easy in the next room, of the home she'd found in this unlikely place, of the man before her who'd seen her worth when she'd forgotten it herself. "I do," she said clearly. "The rings, please." Tommy stepped forward with the rings, simple gold bands that Caleb had brought back from his trip to Cooperton. Caleb slipped one onto Elena's finger with hands that shook slightly, his voice steady as he repeated the vows. Then Elena took the other ring and placed it on Caleb's finger, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Walsh said with a broad smile, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride." Caleb cupped Elena's face in both hands, his touch gentle despite his calluses, and kissed her with a sweetness that made her forget they had an audience. She kissed him back, pouring every ounce of her love and promise and commitment into it, and heard the room erupt in cheers around them. They broke apart, both breathless and grinning, and turned to face their community as husband and wife. The hands whooped and hollered, Rosa sobbed openly, and Margaret pulled them both into a fierce hug that nearly knocked them over. "Your father is so proud," she whispered to Elena. "Wherever he is, he's proud of the woman you've become." The celebration that followed was everything a wedding should be, joyful and chaotic and full of love. Rosa and the other women had prepared a feast that covered every surface of the dining table. There was roasted venison and ham, potatoes and vegetables put up from the summer garden, pies and cakes, and Rosa's famous sopapillas dripping with honey. The hands ate like they'd been starving, and the guests ate like they wanted to remember this meal for years. Tommy and Luis resumed their music, joined by a fiddler from the Double R, and people danced in the cleared space of the great room. Caleb led Elena in the first dance, holding her close while they swayed to a simple waltz. She could feel his heart beating steady against her chest, could see the happiness softening all the hard edges grief had carved into his face. "Happy?" he murmured into her hair. "Happier than I knew was possible," Elena admitted. "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." They danced until Elena's feet hurt, and Caleb's limp became pronounced. The cold always bothered his old injury. Then they stood together watching their community celebrate, accepting congratulations and well wishes and teasing about wedding nights that made Elena blush and Caleb laugh. As the sun set and the candles were lit, casting everything in warm golden light, Elena found herself standing by the window with her mother. Outside, snow had started falling again, soft and gentle, turning the world quiet. "Do you miss the diner?" Margaret asked softly. Elena considered the question honestly. "Sometimes. I miss Dad. Miss the memories we made there. But I don't miss the struggle, the desperation, and I don't regret closing it, not anymore." "Your father built that diner to give us a good life," Margaret said. "He'd understand that you found a different path to the same destination." "This feels right," Elena said. "Like everything that happened, Dad dying, the diner failing, coming here, it was all leading to this, to Caleb, to this ranch, to this family we've built." "That's because it was, baby. All of it. The hard parts and the beautiful parts, they all brought you here." Later, when the guests had departed and the hands had retreated to the bunkhouse with the leftover whiskey. When the house was quiet except for the crackling fire, Caleb took Elena's hand and led her up the stairs to the room that was now theirs. It was a simple room, larger than the one in the cabin, but still modest. Someone, probably Rosa, had decorated it with candles and pine garland, and the bed was made up with a new quilt that Margaret must have been working on in secret. "Nervous?" Caleb asked, his voice gentle. "A little," Elena admitted. "Everything's changed so fast." "We can go as slow as you need. There's no rush." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. "We have all the time in the world now." Elena relaxed into his embrace, feeling the truth of it. They did have time. Years, hopefully. Decades, if they were lucky. Time to learn each other, to build a life, to weather whatever storms came. They'd both survived loss and grief. Both knew how precious and fragile happiness could be. That knowledge would make them careful with each other, intentional in their love. She tilted her face up to his, and Caleb kissed her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. This was choosing each other, she thought, not just once in a ceremony, but over and over, in big moments and small ones, in words and actions, and the quiet commitment of showing up day after day. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too," Caleb said. "Thank you for taking a chance on a broken-down rancher with too much grief and not enough sense. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for offering help when I was too proud to ask, for building a home I didn't know I needed." They stayed up late talking and exploring this new intimacy, learning the geography of each other's bodies and hearts. And when they finally slept, it was tangled together in the big bed, warm and safe and home. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, and Elena woke in her husband's arms feeling like she'd been reborn into a different life. They dressed and went downstairs to find the house already full of activity. Margaret and Rosa cooking breakfast, Emma running through the halls with excitement, the hands filtering in from the bunkhouse looking bleary but happy. Caleb had gifts for everyone. New gloves for the hands, a warm shawl for Rosa, a beautiful doll for Emma. Elena had baked special cookies and cakes, pouring her love into each batch. They exchanged simple presents with laughter and gratitude, the room warm with affection. "Speech!" Dusty called out. "Boss should make a speech!" The other hands took up the call until Caleb stood, pulling Elena up beside him. He cleared his throat, suddenly looking more nervous than he had facing down angry bulls. "I'm not good with words," he started. "You all know that. But I want to say thank you to all of you for making this ranch more than just a business, for showing up every day and working hard and caring about this place like it's yours too." His arm tightened around Elena's waist. "And for welcoming Elena and Margaret into our family, for accepting them, protecting them, loving them. You all made it possible for me to open my heart again, and I won't forget that." "To family," Miguel called out, raising his coffee cup. "To family." The room echoed. Elena felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were good tears, joyful tears. She looked around at these people. Rosa and Miguel, who'd become like parents, the hands who were like brothers, Mary and James and Emma, who'd found refuge here, her mother glowing with health and happiness. This was family, she thought. Not the one she was born into, but the one she'd chosen and been chosen by. The days after Christmas settled into a new rhythm. Elena moved her things into the main house, transforming Caleb's austere bedroom into something warmer and more lived in. Margaret stayed in the cabin with Mary and Emma and James, the four of them forming their own little household that orbited the main ranch family. Elena continued cooking for the hands, but now she did it as the rancher's wife, with all the authority and responsibility that entailed. Caleb consulted her on ranch decisions, valued her opinion on everything from cattle prices to hiring decisions. They worked together in the evenings, planning for the future, discussing dreams that felt possible now instead of impossible. "I want to expand the herd," Caleb said one night, maps spread across the kitchen table. "With spring coming, we could buy breeding stock, maybe take on more land. Can we afford it? With your cooking bringing in extra hands and the cattle prices holding steady, I think so." He looked at her seriously. "But it would mean more work, more risk. I won't do it unless you're on board." The fact that he asked, that he saw her as a true partner rather than just a wife to be consulted out of courtesy, made Elena love him even more. "Let's do it," she said. "Let's build something big." Winter deepened, but the ranch thrived despite the cold. The hands worked hard, the cattle stayed healthy, and the household hummed with productive energy. Jack's leg healed completely, and he returned to full duties with gratitude for Elena's nursing. The Whitfield family settled in as permanent members of the ranch community, James proving himself invaluable and Mary helping Rosa with all the domestic work. In February, Doc Winters came for his regular visit and pulled Elena aside after examining Margaret. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "Your mother's consumption, it's not just dormant anymore. It's retreating. The scarring in her lungs is healing in ways I've never seen. If this continues, she might beat this thing entirely." The news struck Elena breathless. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be. Whatever you're doing here, the clean air, the good food, the happiness, keep doing it. It's working miracles." Elena told Caleb that night, and they held each other in the darkness, marveling at grace they hadn't earned but received anyway. Her mother was healing. Their ranch was growing. Their love was deepening. All the things that had seemed impossible just months ago were becoming real. March brought the first hints of spring, snow melting in the valleys, grass showing green underneath, the cattle restless with the changing season. Elena discovered she was pregnant, the news confirmed by Doc Winters on one of his visits. She told Caleb in the barn while he was checking on a mare about to foal, and he lifted her off her feet with joy, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're having a baby." "Are you happy?" Elena asked, though she could see the answer in his face. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He set her down gently, his hand going to her still flat stomach. "A child. Our child. Growing up here, learning this land, carrying forward everything we're building." The hands congratulated them with backslaps and terrible jokes about midnight feedings. Rosa cried and immediately started knitting tiny clothes. Margaret held Elena close and whispered that Thomas would have been beside himself with excitement at becoming a grandfather. As spring unfolded into summer, the ranch transformed. The new cattle arrived, healthy stock that would strengthen the herd for generations. The hands worked from dawn to dusk, and Elena fed them meals that became legendary across 3 territories. Visitors came regularly now, drawn by stories of the CT's hospitality and hoping to sample Elena's cooking. She grew round with pregnancy, her body changing to accommodate the life growing inside her. Caleb treated her like spun glass, trying to keep her from working too hard, but Elena refused to be coddled. She cooked and cleaned and managed the household right up until the day her water broke in the middle of making breakfast. The baby, a boy they named Thomas after Elena's father, arrived in the height of summer, screaming his arrival to the world with impressive lung power. Caleb held his son with tears streaming down his face, and Elena watched her husband fall in love all over again with this tiny person they'd created. Margaret held her grandson with a joy so pure it seemed to light her from within. "Thomas would have loved this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Loved seeing his name carried forward, his legacy living on in this beautiful boy."
The ranch celebrated the birth with the enthusiasm of people who saw Thomas as belonging to all of them. The hands took turns holding him, marveling at his tiny fingers and fierce grip. Rosa declared him the most beautiful baby ever born. Emma appointed herself his special guardian, sitting by his cradle for hours singing him songs she made up. As the seasons turned and Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch grew with him. Caleb's expansion plans paid off, the herd doubling in size and the profits allowing them to hire more hands and improve the buildings. Elena's reputation as a cook spread so far that people made special trips just to eat at the CT Ranch, and she started teaching Mary and some of the hands' wives her techniques, sharing her father's recipes and philosophy. Margaret's health held steady, the consumption fully beaten back into remission. She spent her days with Thomas, teaching him songs and stories, passing on the same love and wisdom she'd given Elena. She was grandmother and teacher and beloved elder, her life given meaning and purpose by the family that had saved her. 2 years after their wedding, Elena stood on the porch of the main house watching Caleb teach Thomas to pet one of the gentler horses. Her hand rested on her stomach, feeling the flutter of the second baby growing there. A sister for Thomas, they hoped. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, and somewhere in the distance she could hear Rosa singing while she worked, Miguel calling instructions to the hands, the everyday sounds of a ranch that had become home. She thought about the girl she'd been, desperate and exhausted, standing in a failing diner with no hope and too much pride. Thought about the day Caleb had walked through that door and offered her salvation disguised as employment. Thought about every choice and chance and moment of grace that had brought her here, to this porch, to this family, to this life she'd never dared dream of. Her father's diner was long gone, someone else's business now or maybe torn down entirely. But his legacy lived on in the meals she cooked, the hospitality she offered, the philosophy she'd absorbed about food being love made tangible. She'd brought his dream here and planted it in new soil, watched it grow into something different but no less beautiful. Caleb looked up from the corral and caught her watching. He smiled, that rare, full smile that still made her heart skip, and waved. Thomas waved too, his small hand mimicking his father's gesture. Elena waved back, her chest so full of love and gratitude it almost hurt. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not the preservation of the past, but the courage to build a future. Not the safety of the familiar, but the risk of the new. Not survival, but actual, joyful, messy, beautiful living. She'd come to this ranch with nothing but desperation and determination. She was staying with love and purpose and the deep, certain knowledge that she'd found her place in the world. Some dreams ended, yes, but the best ones evolved, transformed, led you to places you'd never imagined, and showed you possibilities you'd never dared hope for. The stove that had once trapped her in obligation and grief had become the heart of a home built on choice and love. The work that had exhausted her now fulfilled her. The future that had seemed impossible now stretched before her, bright and full and completely, perfectly hers. Caleb came up the porch steps with Thomas in his arms, his eyes warm with the kind of happiness that came from building something real with someone you loved. "Ready for supper?" he asked. Elena took his free hand and let him pull her close, the three of them, soon to be four, a family forged from loss and hope and the simple courage of trying again. "I'm ready," she said. And she was. For supper, for tomorrow, for all the years to come, ready to keep choosing this life, this man, this home they'd built together from ashes and determination and love. The sun set over the valley, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, and Elena Harper Turner stood on her porch, surrounded by everything that mattered, finally, completely home.